Finally, we have reached the last part, part 3 of this mega series on creating this nice looking Angular Forms designer. Now, we covered a lot of ground in the first two parts, but in this last part, we are going to add some remaining functionality, like, for example, moving of this through these buttons here, the moving of rows up and down. Secondly, we are going to add the export functionality, which is a critical functionality for our application. And lastly, we just need two things, and that is the finishing touches. So the first finishing touch would be to theme this according to our custom colors. And secondly, we also want to customize some icons here. You can see here the icon here is very different from the icons that we have currently. So we want to use the component design token customization provided in the latest Angular material versions. And then lastly, we're also going to add these animations using the View Transitions API. Okay, so a lot to do in this tutorial as well. So let's get started. But before we move forward, just another reminder that the code for all of this is available on my Angular shop. You can get it right now by going to the link in the description. And you can also try out the app. It's deployed on the link in the description as well. So thank you all for your support. Okay, so this is where we left off previously in part 2. So we have our functioning app here. We can drag our fields here and we can preview these fields here. So a lot of things are done. We have this settings that we have here. So now what we want to start with is we want to add this up down fields here, up down buttons here, in fact, so that we can move our rows up and down if the user wants to. So how do we do that? Well, let's go in our form editor here and the form row here, and let's add these things here. So we are going to go in our form editor and we want to add an up and down button on the left side of this row here. Okay, so we need some space here for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some padding and then absolutely position these buttons here. We're going to add PS10 here. So a padding at the start of 10. Okay, so you can see here that we have the space here for our buttons here. Now we need a section here in each of the row, which is going to be absolutely positioned here. Why are we using absolutely positioned here? Because that's the easiest way to add this little sort of widget here without touching any of the other layouts here. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to also make this as relative because we want to absolutely position it. So we want to absolutely position it based or relative to this container, which is our row here. So we are going to keep this absolute here. Okay. And then within this, we are going to add our buttons here. So we're going to add two buttons here. Let's add a button here. This will be a matte icon button. And then it will have a matte icon inside of it. This matte icon is going to be keyboard arrow up. Okay, similarly, we have another button at the bottom here, and this is going to be keyboard arrow down. All right, and the positioning for this, we are going to do left 0, and we're going to arrange this as a flex. We're going to remove the gap between them, and obviously, it should also be a column. And then we're going to position it top half, in fact, top 50%, and we're also going to translate this in the Y position half, something like this, right? In the negative direction. So what is this going to do is this is going to center our buttons vertically in our container. All right. So let's save this and see how this looks. Now you can see that we have our two buttons here and this is present on each row here like this. Okay. All right. So we also want to disable and enable this based on our position of the row. So the first row does not need to have an up button because there's nothing to go up here, and the lowest row does not need to have a down button. Okay. So simple enough. What we can do here is that we can use the implicit parameters that the for control flow provides, and that is the first and the last parameter that we have. So we can simply do button and we can do disabled the up button when this is the first here like this, and then for this one we can do disabled when this is the last row here. All right. So let's see here. Now you can see that these buttons are disabled, but in the middle one, it's not disabled here. Okay, now we need to add the functionality for these two. So let's add this functionality in the form service as we have done for all of our other functionalities here. So there'll be two functions here. One function will be move row up and the other function will be move row down. All right. Okay, so let's go in the end and let's say move row up, and which row to move will be the row ID. Okay, this will be a string. And as always, we get the rows first, this dot underscore rows, and we find the index of the row. So rows dot find index r dot id is equals to row id. Okay. Then if index is greater than 0, which means there is a row, we can then create a new immutable copy of the rows here like this and have a temporary variable to store our to store our previous item, our previous row here, because we have to move up. That means we have to move previously. And then in the index -1, we want to shift the index 1. And then in the index 1, we want to shift the temp 1. Okay. And then at the end, we reassign our rows back to these new rows. Okay. Nice and simple. Let's save this. And let's also add the move row down along with it because it will be pretty similar. So let's just copy this here. Okay, so instead of index is greater than 0, what we're going to do that is that we're going to check for index less than rows dot length -1. So we need to check if the index is the sort of the second last row. We don't want it to be in the last row, all right? And then we're going to create a new rows just like before. Then we're going to do temp is new rows index, not -1, but it will be +1. And then new rows +1 is going to be the index. And then new rows index is going to be the temp. Everything else remains the same. Let's save this. And now let's go back to form editor and let's add this directly here. So we can do click form service, move row up, and this is going to be row.id. Similarly, for move row down, it's going to be move row down, row.id. Let's try this out here. So currently nothing will happen, you can see, because everything is empty, so we can't see any change. But if we add some fields to it, some different fields, you can see that it goes up, it goes up, it goes down, it goes down, checkbox goes up, text goes up. So you can now move your fields. The empty one goes up. So you can now move your fields up, move your rows up and down. All right, so next we want to add the very critical functionality of exporting the form because our users want to use the form that they have designed in their own projects. So to do that, we're first going to add the button here. Let's go to our app.component TS and let's add a button here because it is sort of out of the normal layout of the page. So we're going to do this in the app.component here like this. So let's add a button here. Okay, so we have matte icon and matte button imported. That's fine. We're going to make this as a matte flat button to make it more prominent. And then within that, we are going to do export form here like this. And we're also going to give a matte icon here. We will have the matte icon of downloads. Okay, then we're going to position this a bit absolutely. So we're going to give the parent as relative here. And then we want to position this in a way that it appears on the right side here, here like it is here. So to position this, we're going to give some classes here. So first we're going to position this absolutely. Now I need this important modifier here as well because there is a sort of a default position relative given to all material buttons. I don't know why. And that interferes with this absolute. So I need to give this important here to absolutely position this. And then I'm going to give a negative top of 50 pixels, a right of 0, and let's see how this looks. And you can see how we have an export form button here, just like we want to, all right? Okay, let's add the functionality for this in the form service because we are generating the form code. So it makes sense to keep it in the form service. So let's go in our form service. And at the end here, we can actually add a comment here, all of the export related functionality. You could also keep it in a separate service if you'd like to. Okay, so here what we want to do is that our main function is going to be the export form function here like this. Okay, now this is going to generate our form code. And let's say we have another function here called generate form code. So it's going to generate the form code. And for now, we are just going to do console.log of the form code to test things out. So then what would the generate form code function look like? Okay, so it's going to be generate form code here like this. And it's going to give back a string. Let's say we start with the top of the form code that we want to generate, and that is going to be our imports that we had, the JavaScript imports that we have. So we are going to create another function, and we're going to call this generate imports. All right, this is going to be let code equals this like this. So we're going to initialize it like this, and then we have generate imports here. This is also going to give back a string. Now I'm just doing this for encapsulation. Otherwise, you can actually just keep it in one single function as well if you prefer that way. Okay, so this is just going to return my function here. So I'm going to keep separate lines in separate literals. So let's say I do import component here like this from Angular core. Okay, and then we also need a new line at the end here for each of them. Okay, and then we're going to do append here like this, and then we are going to have all of the other lines that we have. Now I'm not optimizing things here and checking for whether any component has been used. I'm just importing all of these in a bulk just for this initial version of the app. But obviously in the future, if it gets too large, you can optimize this according to the components that you have here. All right. You only import those things which you want. Okay. So we have generate imports here, and we can then return the code here like this. Okay. So we generate imports. The next step is that we want to generate the component metadata or the decorator metadata at the top there. So what we're going to do is generate component decorator. So this is also going to be a separate function here. And let's say we have generate component decorator function here. This is also going to be a return a string. And then this is going to return line by line the component decorator. So let's say the first line is going to be component. And this is then going to be just the first line. And we're going to add the other lines at the bottom here like this. So everything that the component needs to render, we can give the selector here as well, obviously. Okay, so the selector and then the standalone true, you might not need it in the newer versions. And then you have your imports for the component from your imports, JavaScript imports here. All right, great. So we can now use the generate component decorator here. Next, we want to generate some initial code here for the template. Next would be the template. Okay, so we are just going to do, in fact, I can just copy paste this because this is just standard code here. So we open up the template here and then we open up the form here. Okay, now, so within the form, then we will need to have our fields one by one, but those fields are dynamic. So it depends on the structure, the form field structure or the rows structure that we have here in our app, in our form service. All right. So to make it easier to do that, and instead of using an if or switch else case to actually find out which field type it is and doing something like that, we can actually use the same way that we do for our generation. And we can go back to our field types service architecture that we have, the builder architecture. And you can see that we have an arrow here for generate code for the field type here. So to do that, we can actually add in the field type definition a function definition that every field type should provide, so that we can use that when we want to generate the code for that specific field type. This is going to make it really easy for us to add new field types and their associated code as well in the same field type definition. All right. So let's go back to our field types definition, and it's in your field.ts model here. But we can give a generate code function here, and this will be basically a function which is going to take a field, which will be a form field, and it's going to give back a string. All right, which we can then use in our final generate form code function to generate the code for that specific field types. Okay, so once we have this, we are going to get an error in our field type service here because it needs a definition here. So let's add some definitions here. Let's do generate code here, and this is going to be field, and it's going to give back a string literal containing our generated code here. So let's say for the text field here, something like this. So you can see we have the mat form field, and within that substituting its values that we require to get from that form field. All right. So this is an example of a generate code function for this text field. Let's add it for the checkbox here as well. It's really simple for the checkbox. Then for the select one, it's slightly more complex because the select field actually requires us to add options and all of that stuff. And you can see that we have a generate code function here, which is a bit more complex. So we have some initial code here, and then we have the looping through the options so that we can add our mat options here in the mat select here. All right. So let's save this. So we have our three field types and their generate code metadata available here, which we can use to generate our code for the final form. All right. So let's go to the form service again, and let's use this here now to generate the form code. So now we're going to loop through our rows here. So we're going to do constant row of this dot rows, getting the current rows in the app. And first we're going to check whether the row dot fields are there or not. So if the length is greater than 0, we might have an empty row. We don't want to do anything for that. So if we have some fields in the row, we are going to add the initial code for encapsulating that row, for laying out that row. So it would be a flex, gap4, and flex wrap, so that we have that responsive features. And then for each of the field row.fields, we are going to add the code here. But here we need to have a function which can generate the field code for this field. So we're going to create a new function here. We're going to call this generate field code, and this is going to take in the form field for each field and give back a string. Okay, so first this is going to do is we're just going to get the field definition, this dot field type service. We have injected this at the top here like this. You can see here something like this. And then it's going to get the field type. We're going to use the field type here. And then it's going to return the field definition dot generate code function. In fact, we're going to call the generate code function on this specific field. And if, for example, the field definition is not there, which means we couldn't find it, we are going to just give back an empty string. Okay. So now here we want to call this something like this dot generate field code. We're going to pass in the field here like this. But we also want to pass in some encapsulating code here because we want to extend the field to the whole width. So we're going to just copy paste some code here and encapsulate your field in a div so that we can style it like that. Okay. And then at the very end of each of the fields, we are going to add the ending div here, right? And one more thing, obviously, we need to add some ending code here, which is going to be the form closing here. And then we'll have the class here, generated form component. We can name this anything that we want and just close up the class here like this. Okay. And now we can go back and we can go to our app component and link it up here. So we have the form service injected here already. Let's just call up this form service dot export form function here. And I think we are good to go. Let's check in our console.log what happens here. Let's do text field here. Let's do a checkbox here and the row. Let's go to the drop down here. Okay. And let's open up the console.log to check this out. Let's do the export form and you can see that we have our form here in all its glory. Okay, we also want to save this as a file. So we can use AI to generate some boilerplate code for doing that. Now I've used the same way and I have this code that I have here. I don't need this here. So you can use any other code as well if you would like to. I'm not going to go through this because there are lots of different ways to do this. If you like some other way to do this, then it's going to be fine as well. Let's try this again. So we have text field here. Let's checkbox here, drop down here, and let's export this. And now you can see that we have something downloaded here. Let's see how this looks like. So we have these errors, that's fine. And we have a very nicely formatted, you can format it as well, component form fields here. Great. So your basic export form functionality is completed. So with that, we are done with our main functionality for our application. And now we're left with just the finishing touches. The first finishing touch we want to add is we want to add a custom material theme to our app so that we can adjust the colors here, which are pretty drab. They're like grayish colors to our own colors. And also so that we can customize our components here to our own look and feel using component design tokens provided by the new Angular Material versions. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is we need to generate a custom Angular Material theme. If you go to the Angular Material official theming website, you're going to go in the custom color palette section and you have a schematic provided by Angular Material which can actually generate your custom theme here. So we're going to copy this in and let's say that I close this and I call this schematic here, and it's going to ask the first thing what hex color should be used to generate the empty theme. So this will be our primary color and I'm going to use a color that I already have here, that greenish color that you saw in this demo here, this color here like this. I want to use this color for my main primary color, so I'm going to copy this in and I'm going to paste this here. So this is going to be my main color, and then for the secondary and the other colors I want it to be derived from the primary color itself, so the color utilities actually generate this for us. If you want to override this, we are most welcome to override this, but okay, it's asking for all of the error color palette, neutral palettes. These are all optional, so if you want you can do that. It's asking for providing a high contrast version of your theme. We don't want it right now. Okay, and the directory in which we want to, we can actually do source app themes, and then we can give this, we can call this green theme. Okay, great. And lastly, importantly, it asks whether I wanted to generate a Sass file for that purpose or I want to generate a CSS design token. So I just want to use the CSS design tokens because I want them to be reused in my Tailwind config as well, and I just find it easy to work with CSS design tokens. I'm going to do no here like this. Okay, so this is now created a green theme.css file here like this. Okay, now if you go in the green theme.css file in your themes here like this, you can see that it has generated all of this color. Okay, so now all that we need to do is we need to import this in our main styles.sass file. So let's go in my main styles.sass file and let's import this green theme there. Okay, let's go to the styles.sas file here, and instead of this, because this is used to generate the same CSS tokens, we're just going to remove this, and instead we are just going to use app themes and green theme.css. Okay, this is going to initialize the components just as we wanted to. And now you can see that our component has these colors that we, okay, but you can see a lot of the elements don't have the colors yet. So if you look at the final application here, you're going to see that we have this color being used across the application in different places as well. So you can see that we have this background here, this text color here, this form elements here, this title here. This is all the primary color. So now what we want to do is we want to go in our code and we want to change it up to use the Angular material color roles that we have. So if you look in your code here, in your theme, all of these design tokens represent the different color roles that we have. Okay, so if we use these color roles in our application in different places, and then we change our theme to some blue theme, or we generate another theme, is going to replace that very easily with our other theme. We can also make it light or dark if we want to. So it makes it really easy for us to switch themes at runtime if we use only these design tokens, these color roles that are provided by the material theming in your application at all places, and don't resort to using any custom hard colors. Okay, so from here we're going to select our different roles and we're going to use in our application in different places. But to do that, we're going to also add these design tokens to Tailwind. We need to go in our Tailwind config, which is a CSS file. We need to have a theme section here. Okay, and this theme section is then going to have our configuration for this based on our material CSS design tokens here. Okay, so we're going to copy paste these things, and you can see that we have matches primary. This is the matches primary exported by this, and we can simply use it in our tailwind.css. Now once we do this, we are going to have this available as form of the Tailwind CSS utility classes that we are used to. For example, bg dash, text dash, border dash. We can use any of these colors in any of the utility classes that we want. Now we will start the process of changing our colors based on that. So this is our application that we have here. Now we want to change first of all this part here. So let's go to applet component first of all, and once we go to applet component, we have here bg gray 100. So what we want is we want a color of the material color, so we're going to do bg background here. Okay, so this is also a design token that we have here. Let's go here. So we have match this background here, you know, somewhere like this here. So we're going to use the same. So if we go back to applet component here, we can see we have bg background, and then we have text gray 500. So instead of text gray 500, I'm going to do text primary. In fact, I'm going to make this as text primary because this is our main title, and then below that I'm just going to leave it as text gray 500. I could also make it something like text on background or something, but it's fine here like that as well. So let's save this and let's see whether the change is being updated. So you can see it has some color here now that we want. All right, okay, let's move on to the form elements here. So this is the form elements menu. Okay, the form elements menu, we can see that we have bg white here. Okay, so let's keep it as it is. We're going to make this as text primary again because we want it to be from the primary color, and then we're going to go in the field button, which is the main changes that we want to do. What we want is that the border should be gray here, but for hovering we want the border to be primary color here. Okay, let's save this and let's see if we can see. You can see that we have the primary green sort of shade here when we hover over it. Great. Then let's go down here, and this we have as bg gray 100. What we want is that we want this to be bg primary container, which is a lighter version of the primary color. Okay, this is very nice for containers tinted as a primary color. So you can see that this is now a very light primary color based on that green color, our material theme here. Okay, also for the text, I want to make this as a primary color as well here. So for the icon, I'm going to add a text primary here as well, and this is going to give the same color to the icon. Now I'm using the important modifier here as well so that it overrides that current color for the icon. Okay, and I'm also going to make the same changes here. So I'm going to make the same changes bg primary container because it's duplicate, and the same thing here for this text primary. Okay, and let's save this, and now you can see the icon color is also a bit faded, which is in keeping with what we have here. Great. And if you drag and drop this, you can see the white remains the same. Okay, similarly you can see it remains the same here as well. Okay, great. So we have this form elements working great. Now let's move on to the form canvas. First we need to change the form canvas here like this. So let's go to our main canvas here, and let's go to our title here like this, and for the form canvas we are going to say text primary. Okay, great. So we have this like this. We're going to change the appearance of this selector in a while when we move on to the component customization, but just bear with me for a bit. So we have form canvas, and then we have our row here like this. So each of the row, the title here is text primary, and then this has some special styling here. So let's go to our form editor, and in form editor we have our rows here. So we're going to give this text primary again, and then within this, for this placeholder that we have here, drag and drop form elements here, we are going to give a pg of background. Okay, and the border is going to be dashed. We want to be border primary container here, which will be the lighter version of the primary color here, and this should be enough for the time being. So let's see how this looks. And now you can see that we have this light color here like this. Then let's go on to our main text here. So once we drag out our text fields here, you can see that we have our border here like this. Let's make changes to that. So let's go to our form field now. First of all, we have our border here, border grade 200. So we're going to let it remain as it is, but for the hover we're going to make this border primary because we wanted to make it the primary color. And then for the conditional class that we have on based on selected, we want it not to be border black, but we want it to be border primary here like this, and also we want it to be BG background here like this. Okay, so you can now see when we hover over this, we have this green border, and then when we select this, you can see that we have this nice container color here. So this looks good. And let's make a simple change here as well. So what we want is we want the background here to be the same color as we have here in our case. So in this case, the BG background is basically quite light, so we want it to be a bit darker in shade. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take this color, and I'm just going to show you how we can actually do that. So I'm going to just take this color, and what this color is here, I'm going to copy this color here like this, and we're going to go in our green theme, and we're going to go in our match this background, and we're going to use this in our background, okay, instead of that. And let's save this, and you can see you might need to refresh this again. Once you refresh this, you can now see that the backgrounds are exactly the same, exactly how we wanted it to be, and you can now drag things here. You can see the background is exactly the same here. Okay, so the great thing about using CSS design tokens for material is that we can actually change it whenever we want to. We can change it here, we can change it even at runtime if we would like to, because these are just CSS variables, and CSS variables can be changed dynamically as well. Okay, so it's all up to you, and you can change all of these colors. Whatever you want is going to be updated in the tailwind.css automatically. It's going to be picked up by tailwind automatically. You might need to refresh it a bit, restart the server, because it's a CSS file and that's a SAS file, so it might need to recompile again, but the overall scheme of this theming works. Okay, so our overall colors work really well now. Now we just need to do some component level design token changes so that we can make our buttons as we wanted to. So let's say we want to change this button toggle group to our own way that we want to. So we're going to go in my styles, and I'm going to add a compact button class here, which I will apply to all of the buttons in which I want to make compact. We have already used Angular material as mat here, so we can simply do add include mat.button overrides, and then here we are going to give just 2 tokens here, override these 2 tokens here. So one would be height, and I'm going to make the height of the buttons as 36 pixels, and the shape, build container shape, as 5 pixels. Okay, the shape is actually the border radius, right? So I'm just gonna save this, and then wherever I want to use this, I'm gonna use this class here. So this button that we have, the export button, in the class I'm gonna put here compact button. Similarly for my main canvas where I have the add button, I can use the same thing. So I can do mat flat button, and I can do the compact button here. Okay, and you can now see the button is now nice and small, just like we wanted it to be, right? And similarly the export form is also something like that. Now we also want to change this, so let's write this right within the main canvas itself instead of the global file. So in the global style file we did it because we wanted to apply it to multiple fields, but if you just want to apply it to one specific material component in one specific component, you can do it directly as well. Let's go in my main canvas, and in my styles I can do the same thing, and I can do use add Angular material as mat, so that I can use the SAS syntax, and then I can target the matte button toggle group itself, and I can include matte.button toggle overrides, and in this then I can give these 4 design tokens that I want to change. Okay, so these two are pretty easy. Shape and height, these are pretty simple, but this is actually the color of it when it should be selected, and the color when it should not be selected. So selected state background color should be, and this is also again taken from the material design color roles that we have in our green theme here. So matte is primary, and the on primary color which appears on the text which appears in the primary color, right? So let's save this and let's see how this is applied. And now you can see that we have this nice looking, very sharp scene like button toggle group here, which I really like. Alright, one more thing we need to change is we need to change these fields. These are really huge fields, and if you look in the final form, you're gonna see that the fields are really small here like this. And I like this compact design for the fields because the material design fields by default are pretty large. They're not as good fit for desktop applications especially. So I want to reduce this. So how do we reduce that? I'm going to use a global sort of style for this. So I'm going to go in my styles.sass, and if I go in my styles.sass, I can target it to all of the matte form field in the project. And here I just need to do matte.theme. We can also overall design tokens individually for the matte form field, but you can also just use the density option in the main matte.theme. So this is going to emit all of the design tokens for this density, but only scope to the matte form field. So it's going to affect the density only in that matte form field, right? So the density we want is -3 here, alright? Let's save this. And now you can see in my final application that our text fields are pretty small here like this. Now we can also do something more. We can, for the drop down, you can see that we have these drop downs here. We can actually make this even smaller, so we can make this density even smaller. So we can go in my dynamic options here, and specifically for the dynamic options, so I can do use angular material matte, and then I can do matte form field, target it directly to the matte form field, and I can do include matte theme, and here then I can specifically give a very lower density, -5 for my purpose here. Okay, so let's save this. And now when you go to this, you can see that our options are really nice and compact here, because here we don't even have a floating label, so we actually don't need all of that stuff. All right, so a lot of customization, and you can see the change that it has made. So you can see the final one, and you can see the one that we have made here. Very similar and very sleek and compact as we wanted. Okay, so our custom theming with Angular material is done. Alright, so now we're just left with the last thing, and that is to add the view transitions API for animations, layout animations, so that our UI comes to life and it's more interactive for the users. Okay, so how do we start that? Well, for the view transition API, we want to add some view document start view transition calls on each of the state changes that we make in our application, in our form service. Okay, but we also want to have a fallback for when the view transition API is not supported. The view transition API is still not supported in Firefox. That's the only browser that's left. Otherwise, it's supported in iOS, it's supported in Chrome. So in those cases, we want to actually add a fallback so that our code runs fine and it does not cause our application to break. So let's first create a utilities function. Let's create a utilities folder here in your app here. Okay, utils, and in this utils, we're going to just say view transition.ts. And I'm just going to copy paste a simple start view transition function with a callback. So this is the callback. This is the thing that we want to do in the start view transition. This is the state change that we want to make. And then we're going to check if the start view transition is not supported. For example, the document does not have start view transition supported. We're just going to say start view transition not supported, but we're also going to call the callback. So it's going to run those things fine. Otherwise, it's going to do document or start view transition and run the callback within that. All right, great. So let's save this. And so what we need to do is we want to call this start view transition whenever we make a state change. Now, as it happens, we make all of our state changes in the forms service. So we can just do this one by one. When we add a field, we can do start view transition like this, and we can just give this underscore rows.set inside of this. All right. Similarly, we want to do the same thing for delete field. Okay, but for the delete field, we also want to do something else. So for deletion cases, we want to also inject the application ref and basically force a change detection run so that it happens before the start view transition actually runs. Otherwise, the view transition API does not find anything to change and there is no animation that we can see. So we're going to inject the application ref here as well. We'll say app ref. This is going to be inject application ref. Okay, and then in the delete field we are going to do this dot app ref tick. This is going to force change detection, angular change detection here. Okay, all right. Then for add row, this is also important, and we're going to do start view transition again here. But for the add cases, I have observed that it doesn't matter if we add app tick or not. So this works out of the box. For delete row again, we want to do the same thing. So we do start view transition, and I'm going to put this here and also this dot. Alright, for move field, the same thing again. In the end, when we are changing the rows, finally we are going to do start view transition. Okay, we're going to copy paste this. And since moving involves both deletion in one row and addition in another row, we are going to do the uptick in any case. Okay, for the update field, we don't actually need to do anything. For move row up, we need to do something. So we are going to do start view transition. This is one of the main things we want to animate, because otherwise sometimes when you change empty rows, there's actually very less visible change on the UI, so your user does not know anything. Similarly, we can do the same thing for row down here. Okay, and that's just about it. So let's say we drag the text field here. Now you can see that we have this nice fade in effect now. If you see it closely, you can see this nice fade in effect now. So this is the default effect. So you can see that when we add the row, there is this fade in effect. But what we actually want is we want something more than the fade in effect. So if you, for example, move it up and down, you can see that there's no change here. So we want the view transition API to know about the individual elements that we are animating, all right? And to tell this to the view transition API, we actually need to give a view transition name CSS property to each of the elements that we have. All right, so let's go on and do that for the first of that. So the basic thing that we need to animate is this main canvas and each row and then each field within the row. So let's go to the form editor. For each of the row here, as you can see here, this is one row. So we want to add a class here and we want to call this as styled view transition, and this needs to be a unique name. So what we're going to do is we need it for each row. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do row dash and we're going to add the row ID. Okay, so that it treats each of the row as a separate element. Okay, so let's save this and let's see the effect that this has. So now when you add a row, you can see the existing row remains the same. Now when you delete the row, you can see that the row is being treated as a separate element. And if you move the row up, move the row down, you can see there are seamless transition animations that we wanted it. Okay, great. So similar thing we need to do for the fields. Okay, so now if we drag the fields here, you can see we have the field. If we drag another field here, you can see that the field fades in, but it doesn't reduce its width, so it should be able to reduce its width as well. Okay, we want that. If so, we will need a unique view transition name for each field as well, right? So let's go in our field here, and for each of the fields here, we can add a view transition name here. So we can do view transition name, and this is then going to be field plus field ID here. Okay, here we also want to add a view transition class to this field because we want to also handle aspect ratio changes. So what we're going to do is we are going to add another view transition class to it, and this we're going to call as field transition. Okay, and then we're going to go in our styles file. Then we're going to add a view transition old on the field transition and view transition new on the field transition, and make the height as 100%. Otherwise, we get weird artifacts when we are animating, elements of different aspect ratios in the view transition. Okay, so let's test this out, and now you can see that once we drag this text field here and another text field here, you can see this text field squishes, basically reduces its width, making way for it. And when you add another checkbox here, you can see that it reduces the width further. And once you move it to the next one, okay, this doesn't work. So moving field animation doesn't seem to be working. And it seems that we are making some state change which is not being covered by the start view transition. So let's go back to this and let's include basically all of this code in our start view transition here. So just to be safe, let's save this. And now when we try this text field, this works fine. And now if you want to move this text to this portion here, you can see that it moves fine perfectly. So there must be some state changes within that which were actually not working that well. So we have our view transitions working fine. Now one thing you might notice is that if you try to move this up in here, you will see that there is this artifact that we have here like this at the top here. So what we want is we want to also add a view transition name to this so that it does not interfere with that. All right. So let's go in app.component.ts. We are going to add a view transition name to this, and we're going to call transition name, and we're going to call this as top header, and we're also going to make it a Z10, right, to give it the topmost Z index. We want to also add a background here as well, so you want to add a PG background here as well. Okay, let's save this, and once we do that, you can now see that we don't get this weird artifact that we did before. All right, so these are some of the things that you need to take care of when working in Vue Transitions API. Okay, so yeah, so our animations are done. Okay, let's end this with just showing you an example of how you can add a new field type to this application through our this field types architecture, so that you can know how easy it is to actually do it. So let's say that we want to add date type field here now. So the first thing we need to do would be to define the structure for it, to give a field type definition for it. All right. So for the field type definition, let's go in my field type service, and here we're gonna give a new field type definition here. Okay, so let's say we do constant date field definition. This is going to be a field type definition like this, and this is going to be a type of date and a label of date picker. This is going to show in our menu an icon of calendar underscore today, and then the component, we want to create a new component here. So let's create a new component here. Let's call this ngc, and let's do it in components field types, and let's call this as the date field component. Okay, and then in this date field component, we are going to add our date field code here. So let's add this for the date picker here. Okay, let's import our matform field module here, our date picker module here, mat date picker module, angular material date picker. Okay, and then we also need the mat input module, which we already have, and here then we'll have our input, which will be something like this. Let's import, let's update imports here and import form field here from here like this, and our date field is ready to be used here. Okay, it's a normal date field which all label and the required things here. We can also add more properties if you want to in the future. Okay, now for the field type service, we are going to then specify here the date field component and component, and then let's move on to our rest of the configuration. Let's do the default config as label date, and required is going to be false initially, and then we have our settings config. So what settings would we have for this? We would have two settings here. So the first is the label, and that is a text setting. We have label here like this, and the label for the setting would be similarly for the next one. We will have the type, and let's make this checkbox. Let's make this required, and the label is going to be required like this. Okay, and then lastly we can have generate code here. So this is going to be field here like this, and then we can just use some code to represent this here like this. Okay, it can be used to generate the code for this. All right, let's save this, and let's also add this to our date field here. Let's say we call this date field definition. Let's save this, and now you will be able to see all of the things, all of the date picker and all this. Oops. So what happens is that if you look in the console.log, you will see that no provider found for date adapter, so you need to give a date adapter in the main date field component. So let's just give a mat native date adapter, native date module here. Let's save this, and now you can drag in the date picker. You have this date picker here, nice looking date picker here. You can change its settings, you can make it required, you can change this as date of birth. Now you can add any sort of field types here based on this, and it's really configurable. So I hope you enjoyed doing this series with me, this 3-part series, and you, just like me, learned a lot during this process. And now again, a reminder that if you want the code for all of these, it's available on my shop. The link you'll find in the description. And thank you all for your support, and this is what keeps me going to bring you more detailed real world tutorials like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with another series of tutorials or some helpful Angular topic to discuss.